So, I'm here surviving the nuclear winter that has happened, right? We're in nuclear winter after the nuclear war. Isn't that what was supposed to happen when Trump talked tough against North Korea? Wasn't that supposed to lead to nuclear war? Weren't we all supposed to be dying in a nuclear winter right now? Wasn't Guam supposed to be gone, destroyed right now? Right? No. That's not what has happened? Wait. I'm so confused. Everyone told me there would be apocalypse after Trump talked tough against North Korea, after we upped our sanctions against North Korea, after we upped our military exercises against North Korea. I was told there was supposed to be apocalypse or war or nuclear winter or whatever it is. And no, that's not what's happening today. I guess it's the direct opposite. That's what's happening today. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I am your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We are on until 10 p.m. tonight, right here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. You can catch us on Facebook Live as well. Just like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page. We're going to get into a lot of different stuff today. We actually have a special guest coming on at 8:30 from the Harris Security Group, who is going to talk to us about what her security firm is in charge of securing a lot of businesses and even some schools and other places. And I want to get her expertise on this because I feel like with this whole issue of securing schools from shooters, potential mass shooters, or churches or businesses, I feel like there's so many misconceptions out there about what the right thing to do is. And most of it's just political because we're so divided politically. It's become a political hot button gun control type of thing. And she was on with the show. I moderate a show called Drive Time with Holly on this station Wednesday nights. And she was on last night, and I thought she was really great. And I talked to her after the show, gave some really good perspective. And I want to ask her, what is the right thing to do for a business or a school or whatever to keep themselves secure from potential terrorist attack or mass shooter? And she had a lot of great things to say, so we're going to bring her on at 8:30 as well. We have a lot of other stuff to get to as well. But Tom Benson.
Hello there.
You survived the nuclear winter. After there was nuclear war, right? Isn't that what we were told was going to happen?
That's right. But you talk about winter, I have to get through tonight yet. It's getting chilly out there.
I think it's a little bit different than...
It's a 2-dog night, and I have no dogs.
Yes, that is Mr. Tom Benson producing, surviving a nuclear winter. How are you other than that, Tom?
Other than that, I'm doing just fine. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, so the big news is... the opposite of what we were told was going to happen when Trump talked tough to North Korea.
Well, you talked about this Tuesday night.
I did talk about it Tuesday night. I said whether you like Trump or not, whether you want to give him credit or not, the fact of the matter is his tough talk did not lead to war, did not lead to nuclear apocalypse, has led to the opposite. And tonight we have some breaking news that is even more evidence of that. The left will find a way to still blame Trump for something. The left will find a way around this to criticize Trump. But the opposite of what everyone thought would happen has happened. So the breaking news, and it happened just an hour ago, we have the South Korean National Security Advisor Chung Eui-young announced at the White House just an hour ago that Kim Jong Un has extended an invitation to meet with President Trump. And that they're going to meet, and there's possible talks, peace talks maybe of denuclearization. And not only that, North Korea has said that they will refrain from any further nuclear missile tests leading up to those talks. Pretty amazing breaking news out there. Now, they don't know where they're going to meet or anything like that. But let's play the audio of the announcement from the South Korean National Security Advisor. This is just, about an hour ago. Here's the audio.
I'd like to thank President Trump, the Vice President, and his wonderful national security team, including my close friend, General McMaster. I explained to President Trump that his leadership and his maximum pressure policy, together with international solidarity, brought us to this juncture. I expressed President Moon Jae-in's personal gratitude for President Trump's leadership. I told President Trump that in our meeting, North Korean leader Kim Jong Un said he is committed to denuclearization. Kim pledged that North Korea will refrain from any further nuclear or missile tests. He understands that the routine joint military exercises between the Republic of Korea and the United States must continue. And he expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible. President Trump appreciated the briefing and said he would meet Kim Jong Un by May to achieve permanent denuclearization. The Republic of Korea, along with the United States, Japan, and our many partners around the world, remain fully and resolutely committed to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Along with President Trump, we are optimistic about continuing a diplomatic process to test the possibility of a peaceful resolution. The Republic of Korea, the United States, and our partners stand together in insisting that we not repeat the mistakes of the past, and that the pressure will continue until North Korea matches its words with concrete actions. Thank you.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Tom Benson, but I believe at the beginning of that statement that he gave credit to Trump for this meeting eventually happening. Am I wrong on that? Did I mishear that, Tom Benson?
It's funny you should mention that. It only takes about 20 seconds or less. Let's confirm that here.
Okay.
The Vice President and his wonderful national security team, including my close friend, General McMaster. I explained to President Trump that his leadership and his maximum pressure policy, together with international solidarity.
There you go. Maximum pressure policy.
That's coming from the South Korean National Security Advisor. And he goes to President Trump and he goes to the Trump administration and he makes this statement and he says, look, I thanked Trump and give him and his administration credit for their maximum pressure policy against North Korea. You know, that policy that we were told was going to lead to nuclear annihilation, was going to lead to war, that Trump wants war, that he's a warmonger, has now led to something that really is unprecedented. I don't think anyone really thought this was going to happen under the Trump administration. That not only is there talks of some kind of reconciliation, not only are they stopping missile tests for now, but they want to meet. They want Kim Jong Un wants to meet with President Trump. Whatever you have to say about Trump, maybe his unorthodox style, he's a little bravado at times. His temperament is not usually the best, in my opinion. But that's what we voted for. We wanted something different. And believe it or not, it might have worked. Maybe that's what we needed to face someone like Kim Jong Un. Maybe we needed someone who was different, who was willing to have a little bravado, who was willing to really step up and talk tough against our enemy. You know, I remember you read a lot about Winston Churchill against Nazism. And he was a little unorthodox, was he not?
Oh, yeah.
He was talked a little too tough. A lot of people at the time didn't like it so much. Talked too tough against the Nazis.
He was up against a bunch of appeasers.
He was up against appeasers. He had a history of doing things unorthodox that a lot of people didn't like. And yet, he was the man for the time. Maybe, and I'm not saying that none of this is settled yet. None of this is settled yet. We don't really know 100% what Kim Jong-un is up to.
Correct.
But maybe Trump was the man for the time. Maybe that's exactly what we needed. I know a lot of people on the left will never admit to this. I know a lot of people on the right will never admit to this. but it might have actually worked.
I just hope that Trump tempers his choice of words in his tweets and other comments between now and the time of the meeting.
Well, I think he will. And actually, when all of this started, even before this announcement today, he did kind of temper his words a little bit. He did kind of choose his words carefully. And his tweet was pretty good. He basically said, we don't know for sure. This could all be talk. Maybe a false hope, I think is exactly what he said. He said this may be a false hope, but the world is watching and we will see. And once Trump, I've heard that when you meet Trump in person, it's different. Mm-hmm. It's not a lot of bravado or anything like that. He's very personable, very willing to listen. I hear that over and over again. So we'll see what happens if they actually meet. Now, and speaking of that, Sarah Huckabee Sanders came out with a statement and said this, dealing with if Trump would meet him. It says, President Trump greatly appreciates the nice words of the South Korean delegation and President Moon. He will accept the invitation to meet with Kim Jong Un at a place and at a time to be determined. We look forward to the denuclearization of North Korea. In the meantime, all sanctions and maximum pressure must remain. So there you go. There it is. So, and it's good that he's not immediately appeasing. We're not lifting sanctions tomorrow.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I think that was expected.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trust but verify thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just like what we did with the Soviet Union, just like what Reagan said. So we'll see what happens. I just find it fascinating that I remember, we talked about it on the show, when Trump was talking tough against North Korea. He's had his fire and fury comments. You had Jim Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, saying, we don't want to lead to their annihilation or whatever. They're stuff like that. Really tough talk against them. And a lot of people were like, what are you doing? You're crazy. Nuclear war. They're going to attack Guam. And yet now, a few months later, we're at a point, the direct opposite of that. Pretty amazing stuff. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. We have a lot more stuff to get to on the show. Later in the show, we're going to talk about tariffs. Actually, in the next segment, I'm going to talk about something that's going on in Florida that got me thinking today. I know it's a very dangerous thing when you get Yaffee thinking. So we'll talk about that. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. If you want to contribute to the show, tell me what your take is on North Korea. Do you think Trump deserves credit for this potential meeting with Kim Jong Un and Trump and possible sort of peace talks with North Korea? South Korea is giving Trump credit, believe it or not. Does he deserve the credit? 407-916-5400. Text to 23680 if you have a comment on that. Whatever you want to give Trump credit or not, the fact is this is what's happening under Trump right now. And it's the opposite of what the left and everyone else was predicting would happen after Trump's tough talk. So, very interesting. Maybe it was the right move. Let's take a call here. Let's go to Patrick in Orlando. Our buddy Patrick, how are you tonight?
Yes, Mr. Yaffee, good evening.
How's it going?
Very good. I'm going to change my name. I'm going to change it to Cosmo. That's my last name, Cosmonova. Mr. Yaffee, thank you very much for taking
Okay.
my call. Compliments to the call screener. Thank you. And Mr. Benson, thank you.
He's waving his hand in there. He's like, oh, shucks, not me. But go ahead, Patrick.
Well, listen, I talked to one of my my friends. He's stationed in South Korea.
Uh-huh.
He's a sergeant in the United States Army. Somehow he called me today, and he's like, you wouldn't believe this. I got this around noon today. Apparently they got the news first. Mr. Yaffee, Mr. Benson, my question is, the whole talk has been about Mr. Trump causing peace in the middle, or in
Korea? Yeah.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Why did President Obama get credit getting a Nobel Peace Prize in the first day of his election, isn't this about the United States? This is amazing. I remember when the grandfather of Kim Il-sung died. It was a catastrophe. Kim Il-sung's father came into power and then died. They had parades. It was paraded. And then his son, the guy with the crazy haircut, went nuts, started launching stuff over Japan.
Right.
So I think this is a score for America. At least we can create a dialogue, like the Russians said. Trust, but verify.
Right.
I'll take my answer off the air. But this is kind of interesting times we're living in, Mr. Yaffee.
Oh, it definitely is. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. That is, he actually brings up a good point that I did not think of. The fact that, they gave Obama a Nobel Peace Prize before they did anything. So if this leads to some kind of real peace between North and South Korea and us between North Korea, do they give Trump a Nobel Peace Prize for that?
That would upset the left so much. I don't think it would ever happen.
Of course it will never happen.
Jeez,
I mean, the Nobel Committee is just as political as anyone else.
And they're leftists, sure. Liberals, let's put it that way.
That's funny, though.
Yeah.
I did not think about that. I might have to bring that up with Bud tomorrow in the morning show as well, because that's really interesting. All right, I want to shift gears here a little bit, because there was a story that Bud talked about this morning a little bit, got me thinking today. This is from the Orlando Sentinel. Florida's public schools must post "In God We Trust" signs in schools. It says every Florida public school will need to display "In God We Trust" in a conspicuous place under a bill the legislature will soon send to the governor's desk. The requirement, which had passed the House last month, had looked dead in the Senate, but then it was added to a separate lengthy controversial education bill, yada, yada, yada. If Rick Scott signs it, approves it, public schools and any other buildings used by local school boards will need to display "In God We Trust," the state motto. Now, a lot of people in the legislature say this is a good idea. One person said this motto has been a part of our history. It's been a part of our nation. The principles that we stand on and our forefathers created was "In God We Trust." So, and I started thinking about this. I have no problem with this, obviously. A lot of people say separation between church and state, and this is an issue. That's a whole nother thing. You still have separation between church and state. So this is just the motto of "In God We Trust." It's a general religious thing. And some people might say, well, this infringes on the rights of an atheist or something. Not really. If you're an atheist, this doesn't infringe on your right to be an atheist. So I don't think that's an argument either. I mean, the fact is, this area, Florida, is still a majority Christian place, and the schools can have a right, if they want, to be able to put up this motto in a majority Christian place. Doesn't mean you have to be a Christian, but that's just the way it is. It doesn't infringe on someone else's rights, I don't think. Mm-hmm. But I started thinking about this because what this is leading to is this idea that we should teach God in the schools again. Mm-hmm. That we should kind of go back to that era. And they usually point out the stats, and they're exactly right on this, that once we took God out of the schools, pretty much, prayer and everything out of schools, that a lot of problems in our society started happening. A lot. Crime, other things. I mean, it's really amazing when you look at the stats. I mean, it's like right in line with when that started happening. And some people say we need to display the 10 Commandments and all that stuff and really start teaching these values again. I started thinking about this today, and I'm very torn on this, to be honest. And here is why. It's not the reason you would think. It's not the whole separation. It's not the whole we shouldn't have any of these values in school and everything. It's not an anti-Christian thing. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that I don't know if I trust government schools to teach right Bible doctrine. I don't know if I trust our government because, these schools, these public schools are run by the government. They're run by the local government. They're run by the state and the local governments. I don't know if I trust them to teach the Bible the way it should be taught.
Well, I don't think you have to worry because I doubt very much it would go that far.
Yeah, I don't think it will either. Yeah, you're right. It would be wishful thinking, but this is kind of the talk out there that this is what we should do now is go back in that direction. And I'm a little wary about that. But the other thing that I was thinking about today is when we talk about that Christian values are not taught to our kids anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we blaming the schools for that? Is it really the school's fault that Christian values are not taught to our kids anymore? Is it really the school's responsibility that to teach Christian values?
Mm-hmm. You're right.
No, it's not. This is another issue that really we're expecting schools to pick up the slack. We're expecting government to pick up the slack. It's not the government's job to do these things. It's the parents' job. So when we look at the problem of these values not being taught, and we're pointing the finger at schools, the finger is not in the right place. It's not the school's responsibility to teach those things. It's the parents' responsibility. And frankly, I think this is the failure of the church. I think our churches in a lot of places in this country have failed in really doing their job of teaching these values the way they should be taught. We're too busy trying to cater to the world and worldly values instead of teaching true biblical doctrine. And I think we're suffering for it. And this idea that we should then have the schools do it, it's a bad idea. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. We're going to talk to Chris Harris from Harris Security Group coming up next. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
So there's a lot of talk these days because unfortunately there's been mass shootings. There was one here in Orlando at Pulse, one in Southern Florida at the Parkland High School. There's been terrorist attacks. There's a lot of talks about how to keep your business safe or your school safe or an event safe. And I feel like there's so many talking heads out there giving their opinions, and that there's so many misconceptions about this issue, mostly because it's political. It's turned political. You get each side of the political debate, the anti-gun side and the gun side is one example of that we have a hard time finding the truth about what the right thing to do is to say, secure a school. So I wanted to get an expert on to talk about this. She was actually on the station last night. I also moderate the show Drive Time with Holly. And her name is Chris Harris. She's with the Harris Security Group. And the Harris Security Group does things like they provide security for businesses, schools, events, other clubs, nightclubs, stuff like that. And I wanted to get her take on different aspects of this and maybe what some of the biggest mistakes are that are done in securing these events, because this is an issue that's on top of mind for a lot of people right now, especially after the shooting at the school down south. So let's bring on Chris. Chris, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Hey, no problem.
First, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell the audience what it is that the Harris Security Group specializes in.
We specialize in armed and unarmed security. We do private investigations, and we do executive protection. And also training is one of our biggest things. And
when you say security, you're talking physical people, personal security, actually going to places like that. And what kind of places do you, I said this earlier, but remind the listeners, what kind of places do you provide this for?
I do schools, synagogues, churches, nightclubs, hotels, businesses, large events.
Gotcha.
And then we train each one of those people at different areas. And
okay. So
sorry.
That's all right. So, Chris, the main Chris, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought we lost you for a sec. So the main reason I wanted to bring you on is there's a lot of talk out there, but what do you see are the biggest mistakes that places make when it comes to securing their place of business, or say like a nightclub or anything else like that?
Honestly, even if you hire us, we still see the biggest mistake is training. You have security measures implemented. You have security guards there, but you're not training your staff. You're not training management. What's the next step or what to do? So that's where we have a struggle, is to train the employees, the management, the business owners of what to do in case something actually does, God forbid, happen. You know, the way you train is the way you perform. It's almost like when you were little and everybody did it, the fire drills.
Right.
You knew what to do.
So that's a good point. And you say that you also provide security for some schools, but you say the problem is to how you train the schools and everything, train the employees. So what do you tell, like teachers, for instance? What do you train them to do in a situation like a mass shooting situation that unfortunately we had in South Florida?
It depends on the variable and the location of the school and where you are positioned in the school. And, like, are you in the back of the school? Or are you in the front of the school? Each location is different in how you are supposed to react.
And is it that people are afraid to do this? Like, we're just afraid, we don't want to think about it, and the employees or the businesses don't want to think about it. They just want someone else to take care of it. Is that one of the issues you run into?
I think one of our biggest things that we run into is management doesn't want to discuss it with their employees due to the fear factor. And so once you put it out there that this is a possibility, that this could happen, I think it gets the employees scared, it gets them nervous, and most management and ownership really don't want to discuss what is our plan of action, what is our drills. It's hard to have a drill put in place reference to an active shooter, but it should be like the fire drills. It should be like a tornado drills that we all used to have to go through. We should train because that's how we're going to perform in case something happens.
Gotcha. I mean, it makes total sense to me. One thing when we were talking last night after the show, I had asked you, there are some churches, for instance, where members of their church will be licensed to carry and will bring a gun into the church. And it's a very political issue. There's a lot of people that think there shouldn't be guns allowed in these places at all, that just the presence of a gun is a bad thing and just creates more problems than it's worth. We're seeing that with the whole school debate, whether trained teachers should be armed. But I think you were telling me that you guys at your security group really don't have a problem with that as long as it's done right.
Yeah, of course not. We're very pro-gun. We have a tendency to make sure that the guns in the people's hands, whether they have their concealed weapons, are trained on how to use the weapon in case of the situation. That's why we go on above and our extra training, that we go into a church or we go into a synagogue or we go into a school and we train them, okay, if this happens and you do have a weapon on you, we'll go that extra step on how to use that weapon and to secure the place and where to sit, like I was giving you an example last night, in certain places where we guard synagogues or churches, they all sit in the last row.
Yeah. And that doesn't really help in a lot of the situations.
No, of course not. So it's just all about training, and also drilling. Make sure that they're properly prepared. And unfortunately, like I said, ownership and management get scared, and they don't want to scare their employees. But unfortunately, it's a fact of life right now. This is happening every day. And it's just sad where we're at right now. But the biggest thing is education, and to the employees, to the employers, to the guests, is just education and how to get in, and get out of the situation as quickly as possible.
So there are a lot of school. The big issue right now is whether teachers in schools should be armed. Do you have an opinion on that?
If they're trained, yes, they should be armed. If they're properly trained and they know how to use a weapon, then yes, I believe that they should be armed or could be armed.
And why is that?
It can stop it. That's plain and simple. It can simply stop the threat. And most people who have the weapons or who have their concealed weapons really aren't afraid to use them. It can eliminate, it could eliminate a lot of problems. Gotcha.
Because I always hear when talking about stuff like this that if you're dependent on the police to show up, the problem is you're waiting for them. They're not the first responder. You are the first responder in that situation. Yeah. If you're the victim or if you're a teacher, you're the first responder. You can't wait for them to show up. And it seems like you kind of agree with that.
Oh, of course. If you look at it, most active shooters are stopped by force. It's not like because they ran out of ammo or they're like, I grew a conscience and I'm going to stop shooting. It's stopped because somebody took action, immediate action. Whether it is the police department, whether it was a high school principal, whether it was a teacher or a student, it was stopped because somebody took action.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. The only other question I had to think of, because you said you actually do provide security for some schools, and I don't want you to give all the details of what you do for security, but I think they passed a bill where they had, they want to add like bulletproof windows and maybe some kind of shelter in the classroom that's bulletproof that they can kind of run into to protect themselves. I mean, do those things actually help? Do the metal detectors, do you think those things actually help? Or is it just feel-good stuff?
Well, all extra measures add another layer of security. So if they choose to if you look at a lot of the bars in Orlando right now, they're using metal detectors. And those are, clubs downtown. Before you can even step inside a club, you're using metal detectors. Why wouldn't you do the same for our children? I'm a mom of 4, and I totally believe that the schools, religious institutes, businesses are a major target.
And why? And that's a good point. Why are they a major target? Is it because they see it as soft targets?
I don't believe they're. Yes and no. They are deemed a soft target because what most people believe. Look at you. Just said it before. Most people don't believe that there are people that are armed inside a church or armed at school. And most active shooters want mass casualties. It's not, they're not going in to get 1 or 2 people. They're going in for the mass effect. So they do believe a lot of those places are soft targets.
Gotcha. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. I want to give you an opportunity if someone wants to reach out, use your security group for an event or their business or something. How can they reach you?
They can reach us at 407-949-1278 or the harrisgp@gmail.com. And so they can reach us anyway for training, for site surveillance, to set up their security systems. We do all that stuff. But just to just to say about the churches and the schools, they're soft targets because they're all open up to the public.
Right.
It's a public venue, so that's kind of what makes it a soft target.
Yeah, that's true.
And you can usually just walk right on. What campus, what high school, what school that some people can just literally walk right onto them.
And
without being stopped.
Do you think that should be stopped? That we should make it so you can't do that? Or is that even possible?
It is possible with a really good environmental design.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So it's a lot of it has to do with design at the school, which, of course, redesigning a school can be pretty expensive. The last question I had for you, actually, is why I want to give you an opportunity to tell a business why they should go to you instead of maybe depend on their local police department.
Oh, well, honestly, we are mostly former law enforcement, military. We're the first ones there. We're the ones that are going to stand up and take action right away. Local law enforcement is great. I was local law enforcement.
Right.
But our response times are quicker. We're there. We're going to act right away. You're not going to have that response time. And then also, we know what the situation is right there and then there, hands-on. We're not going to be doing a staging. We're not going to, wait for other people to arrive. We don't sit in our cars. We stand a post. We actually stand a post. So,
gotcha.
That's a big difference.
Chris, Chris Harris, former law enforcement herself, I really appreciate you coming on with us and giving us some real perspective on this issue that's on everyone's mind.
No problem.
Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
No problem. Have a great good evening.
You too. Bye-bye. So there you go. That's the main reason I wanted to bring her on is because she is an expert in this. She deals with this on a daily basis. And when I read articles on this stuff, or I listen to the talking heads on cable news or whatever, or even on radio, I just wonder if it's so much misconception out there. What's really going on? Because I talk to friends, and you bring up the idea of letting a teacher be armed. We say arming teachers. We're not arming them. We're letting them carry their own weapons, basically. And they just shake their heads, and they can't believe it, and they're so upset about it. And so I ask her. She's a security expert. And I'm like, should teachers be armed? And she said if they're trained right and they're licensed and all that stuff, why not? They're the first responder. A very reasonable response. I try to be the voice of reason here, and that's why I brought her on, to be a voice of reason. It was a very reasonable response to cut through all of this BS out there on this issue. And it seems like what she said made a lot of sense.
Well, I think you also have to really take a hard look at metal detectors. People entering the buildings, they got to be checked. You do it for court. You do it for courthouses. Why not for schools? Okay, there's gonna be people who say, "Well, we only have 1 or 2 courthouses, but we have
it's
30
expensive,
schools."
But I think eventually that's going to happen. I think there's no doubt about that. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Download the iHeartRadio app and catch the Beyond Reason Radio podcast. In your ear, telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
Yes, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason, the voice of truth in a world that is beyond reason. We are on until 10 p.m. tonight, right here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. We have Mr. Tom Benson producing as well. In the last segment, we were talking with the security expert on securing our places of business. Securing our schools is a big topic right now. Securing a nightclub and getting some perspective on that. Now, obviously, she has an interest in that because it is her business. But I honestly think she makes a good point when what needs to happen is you have to train your employees what to do in those situations. There's nothing wrong with that. And even she admits that arming a teacher or having people in your church armed is not a bad thing because they're the ones who are going to be there first to stop it.
As long as they're trained properly.
Yeah, they're trained and understand what to do. And she made a good point that, a lot of times in a church, the ones carrying guns, they'll all sit in the back row.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily a good thing because that's where the shooter shoots first.
Yeah.
So you take them all out, then none of them. So there are things you can do.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting perspective. Oh, wait, let's take a call here. Let's go to Bob in Longwood. Bob, how are you doing tonight?
Fine. Thank you, Michael. That school down South Florida, that one building, they're going to knock it down. Why don't they renovate it and put a police station in there and a fire department right in that area there, because, the police would be right there.
It's a really interesting point you bring up, actually, because there is a school that's doing that, and I think it's in Texas. I don't have the information right in front of me, but there was a report coming out, I think came out last week, that a school was thinking about putting one of their satellite police stations right in the school grounds just for that very reason.
Yeah, I was originally from New Jersey many years ago, and there was there was an area in New Jersey that was pretty bad. Like, they had projects, So actually, what they did, they put 2 police stations on both sides of the project. That stopped all the crime.
Really?
Yes,
interesting.
But anyway, thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, no problem, Bob. That's an interesting little fact there that I did not know about. But yeah, there was, and I can't remember where it was exactly, but there was a school. They're talking about building a new school, and they want to build one of the satellite police stations of that city, on school grounds for that very reason. They're there.
I've seen places where there's been police substations in mall areas.
Oh yeah, we have that here.
Yeah,
yeah. So that's kind of a new thing. You have these police substations around town at different areas, and they were thinking, why not put them in schools? It also could save money because you kind of kill 2 birds with one stone. You build the school and the police station all right in the same place. So very interesting stuff. All right. I wanted to end this hour. We haven't done this in a little while. And this was a fascinating story, to say the least. A story so beyond reason, you just can't make it up.
Oh, this is unbelievable.
Yes, so let's see what you think about this, Tom Benson.
Okay.
There was a judge in Texas who did some things pretty interesting. So in Fort Worth, Texas, an appeals court has ordered a new trial for a man whom a judge, impatient with the defendant's disruptions, ordered that defendant to be jolted several times with 50,000 volts from a shock belt.
Well, we haven't heard the end of this one. I did hear this story.
So they put on these shock belts just in case the defendant gets violent or something.
Sure.
That's the potential. But what happened was this guy, this defendant was he wasn't doing the proper decorum. I guess he was being irritable and all this stuff and talking about, he wasn't going violent, but he just wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. So this judge decides that, well, we're going to shock you until you behave appropriately. And that's really not what those shock belts are for. It says, I got this from CBS News, it says shock belts are placed on defendant's legs. The appeals court said they are to be used only if the defendant becomes violent, not to enforce decorum. So this judge was doing it to, if he was lying or something. Nope. Answer the question right. I don't know if that's really what we should be doing in our courts. Very beyond reason. All right, in the next hour, we're going to talk about tariffs. Trump signed his new tariff, executive order today. We'll talk about that and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. One more hour to go. I'll be right back. So Lindsey Graham, he's kind of a war hawk. Don't always like him on things. Senator Lindsey Graham. But he tweeted this out in response to the whole meeting potential between Trump and Kim Jong Un of North Korea.
Okay, here it comes.
He said this. A word of warning to North Korean President Kim Jong Un. The worst possible thing you can do is meet with President Trump in person and try to play him. If you do that, it will be the end of you and your regime. Wow. Lindsey Graham talking tough against Kim Jong Un.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. This thought did cross my mind that he could be doing this whole meeting thing for PR purposes.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's been talk about that. That's something former Ambassador Bolton has been saying for a while, that this could all just be a PR stunt to kind of buy time. So they keep upping their nuclear program behind the scenes, and we're not doing anything.
Right.
The problem is we're still enforcing sanctions and other measures. We haven't stopped that, and we're not going to until something happens.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but I just thought that was a pretty interesting response there. I guess now Lindsey Graham is going to lead us to nuclear war. That's good. Is that what we're going to say now? I don't mind tough talk against our enemies. I just don't. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you also don't know if he wasn't asked to say that by Trump or somebody else in the administration just to deflect the warmongering angle, if you will, from Trump. Have somebody else say that.
I doubt it. I don't think Lindsey Graham is taking orders from President Trump.
No, I don't think it would be orders, but it might be something he would agree to do.
Yeah, well, Lindsey Graham's kind of a hawk in general. So very interesting stuff. We talked about that a lot in the first hour, the announcement from South Korea National Security Advisor saying that Kim Jong Un does want to meet with President Trump, and President Trump has said he is willing to have that meeting. We don't know when or where. He wants to have it by May. So very interesting.
That would be sometime in the next 6 to 7 weeks.
Oh yeah. So Trump deserves a lot of credit for this, I think. And the National Security Advisor of South Korea actually gave Trump and the Trump administration credit. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We are on till 10 p.m. tonight, right here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. If you have any comments or questions or anything we're going to talk about, you can call 407-916-5400, or you can text to 23680. We're on Facebook Live as well, and there hasn't been nuclear war yet, so we're still doing the show. And Tom Benson we survived nuclear winter, I guess. That was supposed to be what happened after Trump talked tough.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if the doomsday clock ticks backwards a minute or two.
No. Has that thing ever ticked backwards?
Yes. I think.
Is it really?
I think when the Berlin Wall came down, I think it ticked backwards.
Oh, speaking of that, Tom Benson, that's a good segue with what I want to talk about next. There's an article, an op-ed in the Washington Post that got some attention this week. It's by a girl by the name of Elizabeth Brewing. Here's the headline. It's time to give socialism a try.
Oh, no.
Yes. Her whole point in this article is this, that after the Berlin Wall fell and Soviet Union eventually collapsed shortly thereafter, she says there's been kind of this mood that socialism is done forever. That was the end of socialism ever happening, and that capitalism, because of that proved that capitalism is here to stay, and it will be here to stay for the foreseeable future. She says she doesn't believe in that. That maybe that was wrong thinking, and that even though historians and social scientists are saying that pretty much, and it's obvious why they're saying it because it works, but that just because Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, that doesn't mean that socialism should just never be tried again.
Let me think here. Let's try it in Venezuela. See how it works there.
Yeah, good point. And the fact is, it has been tried again.
Exactly.
But this is basically her argument, is that maybe it's time to give it a try again. And she's saying, oh, well, and her point is that, well, when she does it, it'll be a democratic-like socialism. Democratization. It won't be totalitarian.
A Bernie Sanders type.
It's always much more extreme than that, but yes. This is always the argument. Well, it's not that socialism is bad. It's just, it was never done right. Yeah. If we do it, then we'll be done the way it's supposed to be. You see, this is always the argument.
Does she work for the paper, or who does she work for? Does it say? Or is it just an op-ed piece that she wrote for the Washington Post?
I think she actually works for the paper. I want to say.
Oh, man.
Well, I mean, it's an op-ed, but, I mean, she's commented on stuff like this before. Now, there is something that she points out here that I find very interesting. And this is what she said. She was talking about some theorist complaints about capitalism. Okay, the problems with capitalism. This is what she said. She says that Americans appear to be isolated, viciously competitive, suspicious of one another, and spiritually shallow, and that we are anxiously looking for some kind of attachment to something real and profound in an age of decreasing trust and regard, seem to be emblematic of capitalism, which encourages and requires fierce individualism, self-interested disregard for the other, and resentment of arrangements into which one deposits more than he or she withdraws. It says capitalism is an ideology that is far more encompassing than it admits, and one that turns every relationship into a calculable exchange. Bodies, time, energy, creativity, love, all become commodities to be priced and sold. Alienation reigns. There is no room for sustained contemplation and little interest in public morality. Everything collapses down to the level of the atomized individual. So what she's saying there is that because our society has some problems with lack of spirituality, lack of God, competitiveness, looking for the attachment to something real and profound, because we have those problems in our society, that's capitalism's fault. And the only way to get rid of those things is to get rid of capitalism and go more to socialism.
And socialism is in favor of spiritual morality and God and all that, huh? Right.
Well, and see, that brings up an interesting point. This idea is things that she's talking about there. Mm-hmm. The lack of spirituality, the selfishness, the competitiveness. The problem with her thinking is that these things existed long before capitalism. These things exist in human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that to change the economic system, in fact, capitalism, the good thing about capitalism is it channels some of those energies for positive gain. So competitiveness, individual selfishness, all this stuff, yes, it's a bad thing. But capitalism can kind of channel that for good, because when you want to make money, well, you have to provide a good service that other people want to buy, sure. So it's a win-win situation.
Sure.
But she does make a point that these are sometimes problems in our society. But it's not alone to our society. It happens in other societies in the past, even before capitalism, but it's also happened in socialist countries as well. An example I want to give you is Billy Graham, the evangelist Billy Graham, who died, I believe, a week ago?
Mm-hmm, about that. A little more, maybe 10 days.
Yeah, a little more than a week ago. Great evangelist. I had this book by him from, I think he wrote it in the 90s. I just happen to have it in my bookshelf.
The 90s? Whew, man.
I know.
That's ancient history.
But it's called Storm Warning. Mm-hmm. But he talked about something that's really interesting here. He talked about how he did a massive crusade in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And it invited East Germans as well, as long as West Germans. Well, East Germans, they were under communist rule at this time. This is what he said about that. He said, one of our most pleasant surprises was the 1957 crusade in Berlin, when more than 100,000 people came to hear the gospel, many from the Eastern Zone. They didn't know much about me or my ministry at the time. They had read stories in the newspapers about the success of the London Crusade, and they came perhaps out of curiosity. But I remember that when I gave the invitation for people to receive Christ, it looked as if the whole audience was coming forward. I had to tell them to go back to their seats. There were too many for our counselors to handle in the field of the stadium. So I said that if they wanted to receive Christ and have their life changed, they should write us a letter. Within days, we received more than 16,000 letters. And that was just the beginning. It was a vivid indication of deep spiritual hunger. From there, we went all across Europe. It was a spiritual phenomenon. He also did many crusades in the Eastern Bloc. From 1977 to 1990, he had meetings in every Eastern Bloc country except Bulgaria and Albania. And he talked about how when he went into these communist countries and he went into this communist area, and remember, these communist countries at the time tried to do the opposite. They tried to get rid of spirituality. They thought socialism was the answer. The government was the answer. Religion is just the opiate for the masses, as Marx would say. The government was the answer. Once we have equal distribution of wealth, we'll get rid of all these other problems. It's exactly what she's saying. She doesn't realize it, but she's saying the same thing in this article.
Sure.
That you get rid of capitalism, then we'll fix all these other problems. Well, that's what they thought back then, too. And what happened was the opposite. It left them more empty. It left them missing something in their lives. And Billy Graham, he goes over there and he realizes there was this massive spiritual hunger. And he notices after communism fell, that's what happened. A lot of people in those areas came to Christianity because they realized they needed that spirituality in their lives. And my point is to act like, okay, we get rid of capitalism and it'll fix all these problems in society or something, and that's the reason why we have these problems. It's just not true. The reason why we have a lot of these problems isn't the economic system, but it's the culture. And I want to delve more into that in the next segment, the solution for a lot of those problems. And we have a lot more to talk about. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. Is she right? Time to give socialism a try. Even though capitalism has brought forward the most prosperity in the history of mankind. And I talked about a couple weeks ago, all these stats about how poverty in the world is practically going away. Disease in the world is practically going away. Hunger in the world is practically going away. You think that's because of socialism? No. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We will be right back.
Subscribe to the Beyond Reason podcast today on your Stitcher app and hear the voice of reason anytime. The place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
So there was an op-ed in the Washington Post that we're talking about here by Elizabeth Brewing, who says we should give socialism a try. You all up for that? It's time. You know, when the Soviet Union fell, that shouldn't have been the end of socialism or the idea of socialism, and we're just capitalists forever. No. That wasn't the end of history. We could still give it a try once again. And her argument was that these problems in our society, that Americans appear isolated and competitive and suspicious and spiritually shallow, that those are really effects of capitalism.
You know what that says to me? She hangs out with the wrong people.
Maybe.
They're probably all her friends.
Maybe. I mean, and my point is, and by the way, this is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We are back. This is News Radio 102.5 WFLA. We're on until 10 p.m., but if you missed any of the show, you can catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. If you have any comments, you can call 407-916-5400 or text to 23680. Now, what's really interesting about this article is she actually kind of admits what I was saying earlier. She says, I don't think every problem can be traced back to capitalism. There were calamities and injustices long before capital. In fact, a lot of the calamities and injustices before capital were worse. A lot worse. She says, and I'll venture to say there will be after. But it seems to me that it's time for those who expected to enjoy the end of history to accept that Though they're linked in certain respects, capitalism seems to be at odds with harmonious, peaceful, stable liberalism of mid-century dreams. It's in the way of our dreams, Tom Benson. Capitalism. It's just getting in the way. She says, I don't think we've reached the end of history yet, which means we still have the chance to shape the future if we want. I suggest we take it. And my point that I was bringing on is that this idea that these issues, and she kind of admits it there, they didn't start with capitalism. They've been around. And the idea that if we go to a socialist country that these problems will go away, they won't. Because the problem isn't the economic system. Because if we go to a socialist country, there's still going to be selfish people, competitive people, spiritually shallow people. They'll just be using it in a different way. Most likely they'll be in government and they'll use it against their own people.
That's about right.
The pursuit of power is something that has been in history since the beginning of mankind. It's not the economic system. That's the problem. It's the culture that we have to address when dealing with a lot of these issues. You know, the debate on what governments, the debate on governments and should it be more community focused or individual focused. You can go back to Plato versus Aristotle, and they had two different thinkings on that. It's been a debate going on forever. And the debate on whether we should be more focused with our own individual lives versus more focused on spirituality, that goes back. It's been debated forever. And it will be continued to debate it. But to get rid of capitalism, which has solved so many other problems, poverty, hunger, disease, for instance, is not the answer. You know, a book that I read a couple years ago, I'm pulling off books off my shelf today, like old books. This isn't actually that old. But it's by Jim DeMint. He was a former senator, and then he was the head of the Heritage Foundation for a while. He wrote this book called Falling in Love with America Again. He wrote it a couple of years ago. And he talked about this, which was very interesting. And he addressed something that, well, let me just read part of the book here. In talking about, well, let me backtrack a little bit here. The government didn't used to always be as big as it was even today. When this country was first founded, it had a very small federal government, very small government. And Alexis de Tocqueville, from France at the time, came over and he wanted to study America. And when Alexis de Tocqueville studied America, he noticed that they were a good people. They were energetic. They took care of each other. They were very, very religious. This is back in the early 1800s when he did this. Mm-hmm. And this was at a time when capitalism was still there, but the government was even smaller than it is now. So why is that? This person says socialism is the solution. Alexis de Tocqueville talked about why the culture was so different back then. He says the only reasonable answer is through the kind of voluntary groups observed by French author Alexis de Tocqueville. I'm reading from Jim DeMint's book. On his visit to America in the 1830s, he saw that within our states, there were 24 of them at the time, were hundreds and hundreds of communities composed of individuals engaged in self-government. These communities were sustained by what he called associations, civic associations, religious and charitable organizations, business groups, local newspapers, and political parties. They built schools and hospitals and churches, and in so doing depended on and widened the spirit of America. Tocqueville identified two major factors that sustained the spirit: active local governments operating within a federal system, and the belief of the American people that they were masters of their own fate. It is that American spirit, based on the first principles of the founding, but weakened by progressive big government presidents from Wilson to Obama, that we must rejuvenate without delay. That's what Jim DeMent said in his book, talking about Alexis de Tocqueville. And his point is that actually the opposite of socialism is the answer. That if we went to socialism, it just creates more of these problems. That in the beginning of this country, in the 1830s, we weren't spiritually empty. We weren't against one another. We actually were the opposite, and that's because people believed in their own faith. People believed voluntarily that it was their job as individuals to take care of one another, to go to church, to help their family, to help their community. These are things that cannot be solved by taking away capitalism. These are things that are actually solved by making the government smaller. Because now we expect the government to do all these things, and we don't want to do it ourselves. And Alexis de Tocqueville, at the time in the 1830s, realized that the American people had the spirit of vitality, a spirit of community, a religious spirit, because they realized the government's not there to help you. We have to help each other as free people. So the idea of this person writing this op-ed, that the solution is we need to go to socialism to fix all our problems' ills, or society's ills, I mean, I think it's the opposite. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. So Trump implemented his tariff plan today, with a few exceptions, believe it or not, and we'll talk about that as well. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Your safe space for conservative thought, not for political correctness. Yaffee is back right now.
So tomorrow morning's show, Good Morning Orlando, which plays on WFLA, this station, 6 to 9 a.m., might be kind of interesting tomorrow because I'm probably going to have to debate Bud over Trump imposing these tariffs. Because Bud's full bore supporter of Trump on this and everything else, and I'm not. And I've explained that before. Here's the latest news on that, by the way. The president, joined by steel and aluminum workers earlier today, signed a companion proclamation. Companion proclamation. This is what we do now. One on steel and one on aluminum, instituting a tariff of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum imports. The tariff will become effective in 15 days with exclusions for Mexico and Canada taking effect immediately, officials said. Very interesting that all of a sudden he had that exclusion of Mexico and Canada. They're saying this is all just tough negotiating tactics to do a better NAFTA deal. But the problem with that is his whole original argument by his administration is that this was for national security reasons. You can't say it's for national security reasons and then exclude two of the biggest steel importing countries. That doesn't make any sense. I think he either got talked out of it by some in Congress or his administration, realizing, wow, we get that much steel from Canada that could really affect our economy. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Or I don't know what else. But this is still not a good move because, and I talked about this on the show, or I believe Tuesday, so you can go check the podcast of that. It's essentially a tax. You believe, if you like these tariffs, you believe it's the government's job to interfere in the market, basically. You believe in government taxing and regulating a huge part of the market. That means me as an individual, or if I was a business owner, me as a business owner, I am now getting a penalty if I decide to buy my product, my steel or aluminum product, outside the country. It's a tax. And you're saying, well, I don't like what the market is doing. The market's choosing poorly by going to these other countries. I don't want the market to choose these other countries. So me, Mr. President, head of the executive branch of the government, is deciding, well, I'm going to tax this, so you choose differently. It's the president manipulating the market. is what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
This is usually things conservatives are against. Usually we're saying stay out of the way of the market, but it's the opposite. This is the government saying we know what's best. We think it's best that you buy from this country instead of other countries, and if you don't do it, well, we're going to tax you. In any other instance, we would say, no, that's big government getting involved in the economy too much. But because it's Trump and because America, we just hear that, America, we just buy America. We think Trump's right. So here's a little bit of what Trump had to say on this today. Go ahead and play cut one, Trump.
We're going to be doing a reciprocal tax program at some point so that if China is going to charge us 25% or if India is going to charge us 75% and we charge them nothing, if they're at 50 or they're at 75 or they're at 25, we're going to be at those same numbers. It's called reciprocal. It's a mirror tax. A strong steel and aluminum industry are vital to our national security. Absolutely vital. Steel is steel. You don't have steel, you don't have a country. Our industries have been targeted for years and years.
He's not wrong on everything he said there about what some of these other countries are doing. But for one to say, if you don't have steel, you don't have a country. Israel probably imports most of their steel. Does that mean they don't have a country? It makes no sense. If you don't have steel, you don't have a country. But the fact is we still make the majority of our steel here, and we import most of it from Canada, and you gave an exception to Canada. So what's the point of this? Now, the first part of his comments there, he was saying, well, we're going to do a reciprocal tax. If they tax us, we'll tax them. That's called a trade war. You said this wasn't going to lead to a trade war. Now you're basically promoting a trade war. That's what that is. And I talked about a lot of this on the show before, this idea that, well, they tax us, so we should tax them. They're hurting their own people by taxing us. They're limiting their people's ability to get stuff from other markets. And then I already talked about this before too. The reason we have these trade deficits is because we have more money. We can afford to buy more from their countries because we have more money. We have more money because of free trade. It helps our economy. So we should implement policies of the countries that are poorer than us, that regulate their economies much more than we do. How is this smart? It's not smart. Trump, here's another cut from Trump, this time talking about NAFTA.
And if we terminate NAFTA because they're unable to make a deal that's fair for our workers and fair for our farmers, we love our farmers, and fair for our manufacturers, then we're going to terminate NAFTA and we'll start all over again, or we'll just do it a different way, but we'll terminate NAFTA, and that'll be it. But I have a feeling we're going to make a deal on NAFTA. I've been saying it for a long time. We either make a deal or we terminate. And if we do, there won't be any tariffs on Canada, and there won't be any tariffs on Mexico.
Okay. So are we going to terminate it or not? What are we doing there? I don't really even know what you were saying there. But this goes back to the misconception that we've been losing under NAFTA. This is just not true. You know who else believes that, by the way? You know who else always preaches that kind of stuff that Trump just said there? Bernie Sanders. So when you agree with Bernie Sanders on something, maybe you have a problem. I'm just saying. Now, I tend to agree with Rand Paul on this. Rand Paul was on Fox News yesterday, and he was talking about why he is against this tariff move, and I completely agree with him. This is what he said.
Well, it's important for everybody to remember that a tariff is a tax, and typically Republicans, conservatives have not been for more taxes. So I'm against new tariffs. They're simply a tax on the consumer.
Is the president right or wrong on this, do you think, Senator?
I think it's a wrong thing to do. If you look at steel use in our country, there are 60 people purchasing steel for every person making steel in the country. So there's a lot of people who purchase steel that are going to be hurt by this. My state alone exports $20 billion worth of products, including a lot of farm, agricultural products. And if there's a trade war, we stand to lose in a big way. And really, the United States will lose in a trade war.
So there we go. We're all talking about a trade war, but he's exactly right. And I think that's the way you have to put it. When you're talking to the American people about these tariffs, you have to let them know it's a tax. That's what Trump is doing here. He's not doing anything other than raising your taxes. And we all want to say, well, this will help the steel industry. This will help our steel workers. But it's going to hurt all these other businesses that Rand Paul talked about there. This is why you don't want the government to get involved in the economy. Because the government can't know all of these facets of the economy. There's no way they can know everything that's involved. That's why we have a free market capitalist economy, because it's much better at running itself than having government manipulation. But this is President Trump coming in and saying, look, I think America should buy more steel here. So I'm going to tax you and force you to buy more steel here. Well, Trump, it's not good for our business. Well, you want to be able to buy steel other places. Don't tell me what's good for your business. I'm President Trump. I know what's good for your business. You buy it here. No, it's not. That's not how it works. I'm going to play in a little bit my voice of reason of the day on this, John Stossel. He's always really good on this. He put out a little video on Reason.com on this, and I don't want to play the whole thing. The whole thing was like 5 minutes long, but I have a little bit of it here where he really does a great job laying out why this is a problem. Another thing I want to point out is Senator Michael Lee, who I like a lot, tweeted out about this today. He said the tariffs announced by the president today impose a tax hike on the American people, which it does, which I've been saying, one that will harm both workers and consumers. While I'm sympathetic to the issues facing domestic steel manufacturers, there are better ways to address the steel industry's concerns. In the meantime, I will work with my colleagues to use Congress's Article 1 power to make sure the tax hikes are never enforced. I like that him and Rand Paul both. This is a tax hike. It's exactly what it is. It's a tax hike on you. What's something that's really interesting, speaking about Mike Lee, is Mike Lee last year actually introduced in Congress the Global Trade Accountability Act, which would require congressional approval of any unilateral trade action taken by the executive branch. Had it passed, Trump would have been required to outline the costs and benefits of his tariffs to Congress instead of taking action on his own. Why is this not already policy? Why did we give the president this much power? This is not something, laying duties or taxes was not something that the executive branch was supposed to be able to do on its own. It was really the job of Congress. And the fact that Congress has abdicated its role, given this power to the executive branch, is not a good thing. And the fact is, a lot of members of Congress are upset about this. In fact, Republican members of Congress wrote Trump a letter asking him not to do this, which I think was probably a bad move because Trump's the kind of person.
You tell me I can't do it, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I thought that. I'm like, oh, no. Yeah. Trump's going to do it even quicker now. Trump's going to come back and say, I want a 50% tariff because they told me not to. But this is really Congress's role. The president, does anyone else have a concern that the president can just do this on his own? That we've given that much power to the executive branch? It was never meant to be the president's job. So I wish Congress would have passed that. The Global Trade Accountability Act. It's exactly what should have happened. It should still happen, in my opinion. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. I'm going to play my voice of reason of the day and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
So maybe we should frame this in a different way when it comes to trade and being against tariffs. What Trump is doing, maybe we should call it trade control. Is that what we should call it? Trade control. Similar to gun control or purchase control. He's controlling your ability to purchase. Maybe that's the way you put it, because it's the government getting involved in your ability to purchase the product you want. If you're a business owner or a consumer, it's the government getting involved and getting in the way of your ability to have the freedom to purchase what you want in the world. Trade control, purchase control. I don't know. Just kind of came to my head. All right, I want to play my voice of reason of the day here on this real quick. He's much better at explaining the problems with tariffs than I am. It's John Stossel. he put out this video. He had an op-ed in foxnews.com, but he also put out this video on reason.com, and I thought it was really good explaining the economy is so complex. This is why you don't want the government involved in things, because the market's much better at working these things out. But when you overtax the economy and overregulate the economy, which is what he's doing with these tariffs, it just creates more problems. Here is Stossel on that.
Millennials love avocado toast, avocado anything.
Take the current avocado craze.
Authentic, nutritious, creamy avocados.
It wouldn't have happened without NAFTA, because in winter, American avocados are scarce. But in other parts of the world, avocados are
in season year-round.
Avocados from Mexico.
Today, Mexico provides Americans with most of our avocados, and we pay less for them than we would have without international trade. But the imports did not drive American producers out of business.
The iPhone is the result of years of innovation.
Trade also makes new things possible. Apple gets the special materials it needs for iPhones by going to the Congo, Mongolia, Egypt, Brazil, 63 countries in all.
Extract silver and platinum from the main logic board.
The materials are shipped to smelters in 34 different countries. Apple could do more of this in the United States, but different places offer different skills. Turkey and China are good at smelting. Digging through rock is cheaper in Mongolia. And so on. Apple then ships its refined metal to a bunch of other countries, where it's assembled into phone.
An aluminium body and formed sheet of glass.
Still, that's just a shiny piece of metal, glass, and plastic without the software.
And for the first time, you can actually define the light in a scene.
The highest paying jobs are those held by techies, most of them in America, who design the software and program the phone.
This is iPhone 10.
This phone is possible and affordable only because of global trade.
So that was just a little bit of his video. The video, I think, is like 5 minutes long. You can catch it on YouTube. Just search John Stossel tariffs, and it will come up. It's really good. But the reason why I wanted to play that little bit of the video is he talks about how complex a lot of this stuff is. So when you look at an iPhone, for instance, you have parts that are made in all these different countries, assembled in different countries, put together, the software's made in a different country, and it's put together to make the one product. And that's the genius of capitalism. That's the genius of free market capitalism and free trade, that we're able to do that and still make a product that's affordable for you. And the government is never going to be able to regulate all of those things, to know how all of those parts are going to work. And when the government comes along and it says, well, you know what, Apple, I think you should make the steel for your phones or whatever, this part for your phone, I think that should be made here, because that would be better for the U.S. economy here. What makes you think the government knows better than Apple on that? And it was the same thing with many other products. That's why I tend to be a free trade kind of guy. That's why, because it's the free market working. And I totally understand that these countries like China and some countries in the European Union and stuff like that, that they put tariffs on us, and it's harder, and that can make it harder for us to export to those countries. And maybe Trump's just doing this tough negotiation tactic, and maybe it'll work. I think it's a bad idea. But this idea that, one, trade deficits are automatically bad, that's just not true. When our economy has done well, we've had higher trade deficits. During the recession, we had a lower trade deficit. It's because our people were poor and couldn't buy as many products. There's just so many misconceptions about this issue. So I thought that was a good point by John Stossel. Tom Benson.
Yes, sir.
During the break, you had given me some interesting news.
I did? What did I say?
Coming out of Netflix.
Oh,
and
yes, that Mr. Obama is negotiating with Netflix to produce a series of shows and topics that about his presidency, which basically says to me he wants to continue to shape his legacy because out of sight, out of mind. So this is a way for him to be in sight.
Could you imagine if Bush did that during Obama's presidency? Could you imagine the reaction? There won't be that reaction now.
Oh, no, of course not.
People, apparently everyone hates Trump, so they're going to want to see Obama. And it might actually, among the left, that actually might do well. That might get a lot of views. But I was just thinking about that. Could you imagine? Because Bush stayed silent pretty much under Obama for the most part.
And
of course, now he's talking under Trump, which is kind of...
And he's talking with Netflix, who, cater to a lot of people, obviously, but a lot also, including millennials, who aren't watching traditional TV. This is a way to get his message out to them.
And it's all about shaping his legacy.
That's right.
So are you going to watch it?
Oh, absolutely no. No.
No? You're not going to save it right now and watch it? And
all I have to do is look around and I can see his legacy.
Right? I might have to watch it just because then I can talk about it.
There you go.
On the show. It actually gives me
know what the enemy is doing at all times.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the end of the show. I appreciate you all joining us tonight. If you want to find out more about me, you can like the Facebook page, Beyond Reason Radio. Send me a friend request on Facebook, or you can follow me on Twitter at Beyond Reason R. If you missed any of the show, catch the podcast anywhere that podcasts are available. And, I'll be on with Bud tomorrow morning, 6 to 9 a.m., probably debating the whole tariff issue. We'll see his take versus mine. And, I'll catch you guys next time as well. Bye.
That nothing comes from indifference. I look inside.